Hello and welcome to the Personality Color Matrix podcast. I'm your host, Corbin Billings, personality expert, second generation. And you know that this is an evolution of an insight tool called Primary Colors. And today we're going to be talking with Stacy Axon, who is a personality expert that was certified in Primary Colors. So if you hear the term Primary Colors coming around, then just know that we're actually talking about the past, and now we've evolved into the Personality Color Matrix. But I'm so excited to sit down with Stacy because she is a human behavior expert. She's also a leadership advisor, a growth strategist, and a team alignment facilitator. She can give us some really incredible perspective, not only about human behavior and personality, but also what really distinguishes and sets apart the Personality Color Matrix and Primary Colors Insight tools from all of these other personality assessments. There's no shortage of color personality assessment tools out there, but there is a real value and difference and uniqueness to the Personality Color Matrix tool. And we're also going to be talking about how vital these tools and this insight is in our modern world, which sometimes doesn't prioritize our emotional knowledge of ourselves and our relationships. So thank you for sticking around with this incredible podcast. Let's dive in. Hello, wonderful Stacy. It's good to see you today.
Great to see you, Corbin. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I think that right off the bat, I would love to know where you got introduced to Primary Colors and how it left that lasting impact and why you became so fascinated with it and chose to run with it.
Wow. Well, if we're going to go there, your mother, Dawn Billings, hosted a group of women. It's called the HeartLink Network. And that's actually how I met your mom. It was years ago, and it was in this very room that we had our first meeting. And as I got to know her, that's when I learned about the primary color personality. And so she invited me to take the assessments and to go through the process, and I was hooked. I have done all kinds of assessments over the years. I've been involved in leadership development and personal development for probably, well, let's just say more than 2 decades, so we don't age ourselves too much. And it was very unique, something that I'd never seen, the contextual aspect, the centered and extremes, and I wanted to know more. I was hooked. I needed to know as much as I could about it, and that's why I became certified in her tool.
Now, what is it about human behavior that fascinates you, and why is this so important, especially today in modern society with the advent of technology, certainly artificial intelligence? Why is it so vital, do you think, not only in our personal lives, but our professional lives, to experience that success that we need to raise and be aware of emotional intelligence?
Well, we're emotional beings. We really are. And everything we do is driven by our emotions. Unfortunately, too many of us use our emotions, shall I say, irresponsibly. We become reactionary as opposed to responsive because we're just not aware of how to manage them, how to reflect, how to hit the pause. And that just goes back to kind of the 4 pillars of who we are as a human being. You know, we have the mental aspect, we have the spiritual aspect, the physical aspect, and the emotional aspect. 3 of the 4 are strongly supported in our society, right? So if you look at the physical aspect, there's gyms everywhere. There's tons of blogs on how to be healthy and how to take care of your body. You know, the spiritual aspect, we've got churches everywhere, synagogues, whatever it is, constantly support around the spiritual aspect. The mental aspect, we've got formal education, traditional education, charter schools. There's all this about the brain and our mental aspect. But when it comes to emotions, where in any of that are we being taught how our emotions serve us, how they can hinder us? We're not. For decades, we were put in a box, boys don't cry, for example. And then as we moved through time, people started going to therapists, but there was still kind of this negative connotation around that, where now it's actually proven, especially with leadership, that those that have an emotional intelligence or a higher, more developed emotional quotient are actually more successful because they're tapped into not only their own emotions and able to self-regulate, but how others function, how others manage their emotions, and how to respond to different individuals. So that's why a tool like the color matrix, I think, is vital. And I know we're going to get into that. But that's why if we don't learn as humans how to regulate our emotions and understand why we might get triggered in certain situations and how to really manage that, we're seeing the downfall of those not able to do that. We're seeing that every day, right? So the more that we can elevate that, become more responsible with our own emotional energy and reactions turned into responses, I think we'll do much better.
I love that. You said something there that really resonated with me. It's the emotional quotient. And then it makes me think of IQ versus EQ. IQ is like this fixed thing that there's not this great ability for us to necessarily develop that. But when it comes to EQ, that's something that can be learned. It's something that we can grow into. And so that's where I've seen it. Cause even, speaking from personal experience, I did not come into this world with the highest EQ. But fortunately I was born to the mother that raised me and, has an exceptional understanding of emotional intelligence. And that has been a real blessing. And I've seen so much growth that's actually been able to happen, as a result. And so, it's not something that we necessarily have to live with a low EQ. It is always within us to better understand our behaviors, our attitudes and outlooks, and make a choice that is able to shift how we show up in our relationships or how we show up in our personal regulation of our emotions. And so, it's interesting for me. Have you heard of this concept that's emerging now of volitional personality change? I'd love to start here.
I've heard a little bit. I haven't dove into it too much, but I've heard a little bit about it.
So it's this emerging field that is getting validated by scientific research and study. But the idea that, so often with these personality assessments, we may just box ourselves in. And you were talking about that earlier about how it's not about putting yourself in the box. Obviously, Personality Color Matrix is a contextual insight tool. So we're looking at ourselves over a wide variety of emotional and life contexts that we find ourselves in. But what I've found is whatever colors you test highest in, there is a possibility to look and see, first of all, are those showing up in their center or in their extreme? But if they are not serving us in our relationships, there's a possibility to actually grow certain colors that are more dormant, as if we were literally in the gym exercising a muscle, and become more capable in that specific arena. Like, speaking from personal experience, I test really, really high in colors that are indicative of a very creative individual in the center, but then in the extreme can become quite unreliable. And it's actually the colors that aren't involved in my blend that really create that reliability. And so it's been a fascinating adventure recently, and actually using myself as a guinea pig in order to figure out how to grow and shift my personality willfully. And I think that leads into what you do with team alignment or growth strategy. It's not necessarily about going and looking at well, this is what it is, here's the self-understanding, but here's a roadmap toward improvement.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. There are far too many assessments out there, whether they're intended to or not. The recipient immediately puts themselves in a box, right? They're either the IFJ, whatever, from one assessment company. They might say, well, I'm a D and that's why I am the way I am. And they just root themselves into that profile and just say, well, that's why I am the way I am, or I am a this. And no, we're human beings. We're contextual. We're actually all the things, right? We're all the descriptors. We're all the aspects of each personality or behavioral style or whatever we're using at the time. It's just, how are we going to apply the information?
Yeah, and it's like figuring out there's this concept, at least rooted in personality assessments, where we're always talking about traits or we're talking about types. And one of the things that my mother has really ingrained in me is to never use those words. They're essentially the forbidden, unspeakable vocabulary. But instead, we really root everything in tendencies. And what do you think is the difference between, typifying ourselves versus looking at, well, this is what I tend to do in certain different contexts? How does that speak to you, and how has that been helpful and been useful in using this technology as opposed to other personality assessments?
Well, the first thing is, I think it gives us grace. Gives us grace. When we type ourselves, we think we're stuck. This is how we are, and there's no option. But when we realize this is a tendency, that we tend to be this way in this environment or this situation, now it opens ourselves up to go, okay, maybe I should reflect. Is this how I want to show up? Is this how I want to tend to behave moving forward? Or do I want to tend to behave differently? And it allows for self-reflection, for grace, and just helps us realize we're all in the same sandbox. How do I want to show up and play?
Yeah, one thing that I've been noticed, it's funny that you say the grace thing, because like sometimes I try as often as I can to live in my centered personality tendencies, but there are those moments where inevitably something doesn't go quite according to plan or according to my expectation, and then that makes me want to exercise some degree of control, which really stems from like a feeling of deserving. And for me in particular, we'll get into what all the colors mean in their center and extreme, but I go into my blue extremes far too often, seeking perfection, and then as a result of that, procrastinating because it's not perfect and perfection's the illusion. Or I will be insistent on being right instead of being graceful or compassionate. And certainly when you insist on being right, then everything else has to be wrong. And then getting to that point where I go, well, actually, this isn't who I am. This is just how this emotion is showing up. Even right now, I'm listening to the yard work happening in the backyard, and I'm going, man, I'm really hoping that the microphone isn't picking that up and distracting everybody. But it's like, pull yourself out of that blue extreme and root yourself in the center. I think it's easier somehow to let go of a tendency than it is to let go of a definition. Like, this is who I am, and I appreciate the fluidity that provides. When it comes to our centers and our extremes, I'd love to broach into that, because I know that that's a key aspect of your human behavior toolkit. Where is the line for you between when someone's behaving in their center and then when they shift into behaving out of their extreme? And then how do we navigate our way back from your understanding?
I love this question. So, and I owe a lot of it to your mom because she helped as well. But I think once, if it's yourself and you're noticing that you're either slipping into frustration or slipping into entitlement, when you start feeling righteous, or as you said, that I'm right, everybody else is wrong.
My mom always corrects me here. She says self-righteous.
Self-righteous.
Because sometimes, we get into this idea of like righteous. Now, that's the centered green tendency would be, doing what's morally right. But then we get into that self-righteous where we start passing a lot of judgments about other people and how they're doing the quote unquote wrong thing. And then that leads us to, forsake those connections or reject people. But sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. It's just that self-righteousness.
And to bring it into practical examples, it can be something as simple as you going to open the dishwasher door and noticing that it isn't put away, the dishes are not put in there properly. Has anybody ever felt that before? Who put the dishes in this way?
Yeah.
Right?
Who put the toilet paper where the roll goes over instead of under?
So those are examples of how you're starting to slip into your extremes. Now, you can recognize that, oh my gosh, judgment, entitlement is happening. I'm starting to slip. And you could easily bring yourself back into center. Okay. Starting to ask yourself a question. Oh, why am I being triggered? Why am I feeling self-righteous? Why am I feeling judgmental right now? And then you can easily course correct. What happens is if you're not emotionally aware and you start allowing that to go further into your day, oh, the dishwasher didn't get put away and there's still dishes in the sink, and then you spill your coffee and then you're late to work and you allow it to continue to spiral. And it makes it much more difficult to get back into your center. And the reason we want to stay in our center is because all the good stuff happens there. Joy, creativity, problem solving, pleasurable conversations, even constructive conflict resolution happens in our center. But if we allow ourselves to spin out, allow a little tiny thing just evolve into a mountain, things are just not going to go well.
Yeah, it doesn't serve us in the long run, nor the people that we're in relationships with. There's a key here that I think I've been able to kind of pinpoint, and what is that moment when we shift from center into extremes. And I think that it's in the center we're making observations, in a sense, just evaluating and reflecting. We shift into the extreme and we start passing judgments. And the more that I think about it, and we talk about this in the Personality Color Matrix, the book that my mom and I have been writing, that comes out on July 25th. By the time that this podcast airs, it may already be out. But the key is this perceived scarcity that drives the feeling of entitlement or narcissistic entitlement. Like, we are looking at our environment and whatever we have is not enough, and therefore we deserve more. And so rather than focusing on the abundancy, which fills that gratitude and appreciation, we start focusing on that perceived lack, perceived being the key word because it's relative. And it may be based even on what's happened coming up before. Have you had a good experience, or has everything been going wrong that day? And so then that leads us to a place of like, when is something going to change? And once again, the emotions begin to take over, and we're not necessarily totally aware. It's almost like those extremes create blinders that just focus us even more on the negative aspects of our existence.
Yes, and you said something very powerful, that when we're in our center, we tend to be more of an observer. And I think that's because we're confident in who we are. We're confident in our abilities. When we're in our center, we just feel strong and grounded and capable, right? That's one reason why I really encourage doing some kind of a morning ritual. So every morning, whether it's 5 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, or longer, do something to get yourself rooted and grounded so you can stay centered. If you think about a tree and the roots, right? That's why we are centered and grounded. And that's where all the good stuff, the fruits of our day can happen. And the emotions do take over when we slip into our extremes. And that means that you are not really grounded.
Now we're getting into something that's it's been really fascinating for me to figure out recently. You touched on the importance of rituals, daily or weekly, that essentially form routines, but that consistency is what allows there to be confidence. And that confidence, people say, oh, confidence is the most attractive thing in relationships, but what builds the confidence where people can actually trust us to show up in our center as opposed to our extremes? And then what allows us to have the confidence within ourselves that, no, this is who I am. I don't live out of my extremes. I choose my center. And it really comes down to this consistency aspect. And I'll throw this one to you. What color personality tendency is the most consistent?
I have to say purple.
That's exactly it. Now, this is the dilemma that I have been in. I call it the color dilemma that I've really been reflecting on in the past year of my life, starting this business, And when you're an entrepreneur, so much of it has to be based on accomplishing tasks. In my former life as a filmmaker or artist, it was all about creativity. And so I would take the primary colors personality insight tool assessment or the color matrix personality assessment, and I would score lowest in purple in just about every context outside of my ideal self, where purple would show up in the top 3. And it's really interesting. In the past year, I've been reflecting on this, that there is a reason why purple is our crown chakra. It's here at the top of the head, because there's this managerial, and by that I mean self-managerial, but this ability to organize ourselves and direct ourselves towards accomplishment, and that can be showing up certainly in work, in leadership and team management, but also just like as a provider for our family. There's no way that you can be successful in your marriage or in your job without those strong purple personality tendencies. And as I'm reflecting, I have been reflecting, it's like, well, maybe that's what went wrong in my relationships in the past. And this gets me into that. We're going to circle back to this volitional personality change, where you don't have to be stuck in just testing lowest in a color. You could say, well, okay, so now I have the awareness that I'm actually lacking that consistency. How do I make sure that I'm actually growing that muscle and showing up more consistently in everything? And this is where we go full circle to the daily, weekly rituals, the routines that we build for ourselves. And so I've gotten into this place now where I used to kind of scoff at purple personality tendencies, because it's like, man, do you really need to number your socks so that you always have the pairs, together? Or I've kind of scoffed at the idea of needing to make a list of all the things that you need to do, and one of those on there is relax. I got to literally make a list in order to remember to relax. But now I'm finding that the more that we're able to pour into that planning, the more actual benefit in reality that we get. And it's given me this whole new respect for purple personality tendencies. And I think it's now actually the most vital color towards success. If you want to define success from a perspective of discipline as opposed to creativity, I mean, your strength would always define success in terms of how much is in your bank account or what are your accolades or accomplishments. I think that sometimes on the warmth side of the color wheel, we attribute success more towards purpose and meaning that we create in our lives. But I think that ultimately we live in a capitalist society where that bank account matters. And so it's been really interesting. Like, what do I do and how do I show up for myself that allows me to develop that consistency and accomplish as much as I can? I think this comes down to the productivity aspect that people with strong purple personality tendencies are just a master of. And I'd love to kind of bounce back and forth here. What have you found are the daily rituals and practices that really help you succeed? People listening can benefit from. And then I'd love to jump in with what's helped me actually grow that purple personality tendency within myself, so that I now more closely reflect my ideal self context of the personality assessment, as opposed to just how I traditionally would look at myself in a personal or professional context.
What you shared just got me thinking that having the awareness gives us the power of choice, because humans, we do get to choose how we show up in different situations. And once you understand your tendencies in different situations, and you can choose to say, okay, I don't really have this as a strength. It's not something that I naturally lean into, yet I'd like to apply this, especially in this category of my life or this area. I'd like to apply that more. And when you can choose, as you have, to lean into that purple, it really does give you so much more freedom in your day. It really does. Then the times that you've set aside for creativity, you really get to flourish, because you don't have this noise in the back of your head of what I call shoulding all over yourself. You don't say, I should be doing this, or I should not forget.
I'm
should
so
not.
glad you said should, and I totally did not hear that initially. Shoulding
all over yourself.
That's classic.
Too many people do it. I should be doing this, and know that somebody else's values sticking into your head when you say I should be. And when you allow yourself to lean into that purple and create a plan, create color blocking. So when you ask me what are some things I do, other than the ritual that I have every morning, and I call it my exciting morning ritual because I want to look forward to, I am not a morning person. Let me just clarify. I am not a morning person. I do not lean into mornings. That's one reason why I have a dog to help me with my mornings. But when you have a morning ritual so that you can just, whether it's prayer, meditation, reading something inspirational, do not do work, do not open your emails, do not open social media. This is a time for you to get centered, to focus on gratitude, and get yourself ready for your day so you can handle whatever's coming to you. And then I do color blocking on my calendar. So I set aside the times that I want to be focused on my creativity when I'm creating digital products like the Human Behavior Toolkit, or how do I want to create a new program for team building, or whatever it might be. I have to set aside that time, or other things will take over, right? I need to set aside time to spend with my children. They're older, and I want to be able to make sure I have cherished time with them. Even if it's just alone time or self-care time or reading time or, going to church, whatever it might be, color block it. If you do not make time on your calendar, I promise you, other people will take time that you really need to have for you and your priorities. So those are two things that are pretty much paramount for me, is my color blocking, making sure that I have, even every day, I have at least 30 minutes of planning time and decompression, and just, I need to assess where I am for the day. Again, things happen so fast in our society with AI and social media and all that's going on with natural disasters, and there's constant bombardment, and we need quiet time. We need time for reflection and to just think.
Now, this is interesting. So when you're talking about color blocking, what you're saying is like allocating some hours and then assigning the intention behind that time with an association of the tendencies on the artist color wheel.
Yeah, that's one way you can do it. Yeah. So you can certainly align those priorities on your calendar to align with the color matrix colors and those tendencies. I actually was color blocking before I was introduced to primary colors in the color matrix. So for me, anything that's an income producing activity was green. Anything, and what's ironic is some of it lines up. So any family time was yellow. Okay, so for those that learn about the color matrix, you're going to know that those two align a little bit.
Yellow's highly nurturing and service-oriented.
Green, the money maker's probably more red, but the green,
red or purple. Yeah, greens would be more like, I need to set aside time to write that song or to lean into something inspirational.
Yeah, and teal blue is my personal time, my downtime. So it's whatever colors you assign. So it's up to you how you want to assign it on your calendar. And then if you want to just have leftover time, then leave it blank, right? If you are somebody that believes in going to the dentist 6 months, every 6 months, then you're making time for that, right? You're scheduling it out. Everything else deserves as much of a priority on your calendar.
And so that's fascinating. Okay, so when I heard you say color blocking, I because this is something that I've actually been implementing in growing my purple, is that I have arranged my days of the week according to the colors and the tendencies associated with those colors to live with intention every day. So Monday is my red day. That is hitting the ground running in the week, getting as much done as possible, definitely getting in a workout or two. in order to make sure that I'm really embodying that physical version of myself. It's truly like the most empowering way to start the week. And then I go into Blue Tuesdays, where I do the deep dives into the nitty gritty of solving problems. Part of that will probably be figuring out how to clean up the audio of this podcast from the yard work that's going on. But it's getting into little technical problem solving on that day, and also going to a book club in the evening. And then my Wednesdays are green. That's the day where I lean into my spirituality and going to Bible study. And also will begin my day, with a workout, but also like inspirational music time, motivation, a little bit less individualistic focused and a little bit more big picture focused. Thursdays, that's daddy son time. Looking forward to that this evening. That's really my yellow day, to make sure that I'm just setting aside all of that time to be the best father that I can be. Friday is purple. And it's all about looking at the metrics. So that's the day that I'm going to get on the scale. That's the day that I'm going to look back on the, how effective were the emails that got sent out? What are the data points? How can we improve outreach? And then the Saturday is for orange. That's for connection, for fun, joyful experiences. And then I allow that Sunday, we got my son that whole day. So Sunday becomes literally my Sunday, but that's awesome. A wonderful day of integrating it all. Because it's, in order to be the best dad that I can be, I really have to actually pull in all of these colors. And that's a key that we were talking about earlier. It's like the difference between types and tendencies. We are all of the colors that are on the color wheel. Not just one or a blend of three. There's that potential for us to tap into the beautiful center of all of those colors at any given moment. We talked earlier a little bit about the extremes and how the extremes come from that judgment or that entitlement. Based on your understanding of human behavior, what is that solution to the entitlement, the narcissistic entitlement that we feel, the perceived scarcity? What helps recenter us?
Again, it comes down to choice. First of all, are we an individual who wants to do better, to show up better? And why do we want to do that, right? That's all part of the aspects of emotional intelligence, right? So there's 5 aspects to EQ. There's self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, social regulation, and the motivation behind that. So are we motivated? Because we could get into the whole clinical side of narcissism, and that's probably for another day, right? But we all have narcissistic tendencies in our extremes, right? So how do we bring ourselves back to center? Awareness is key. We have to be able to be self-aware enough to notice when we're slipping. And thank goodness for emotions, because your body is an amazing feedback mechanism, and that's really all emotions are feedback mechanisms. We label them good or bad, right? We say happy is a good emotion, sadness is a bad emotion. Well, if you take the labeling, right, the types out of it, and just say happiness, why am I feeling happy? This is my body, my emotions giving me feedback. Sadness. Why am I feeling sad? If we ask why, if we look into the why behind the emotion, we're already taking control of ourselves. We're already in the process of regulating because we're asking why. So if you can feel how good you feel when you're in your center and be aware of how that feels and what shows up for you and how others react to you when you're in your center, and then notice when you start slipping into those extremes, that self-righteous, that judgment, that entitlement. We all know what that feels like. It doesn't feel good. Our body starts giving us feedback. So ask, why am I allowing myself to be triggered? Why am I just so upset about this? What's going on? And what happens is that brings us back into our frontal cortex, which is where we can actually have critical thinking and process things. But if we stay stuck in that primary cortex, which is where reaction happens, that's where we continue to slide down that slippery slope. So it's asking the questions, having enough foresight, enough awareness to notice the different emotions that are coming up. And then don't just label it something as simple as happy or sad. Dig deeper, because there's different categories of happiness. Am I joyful? Am I feeling abundant? And am I feeling just overwhelming gladness, right? Am I feeling sorrow, sympathy, empathy, right? Like dig into it, because the more we can get clear about the emotion, then we can really start asking ourselves, why are we feeling this way?
And this is powerful. In your human behavior toolkit, you have an emotion wheel that it almost starts off with, okay, so I'm identifying that I'm in a state of fear, but then that fear is actually coming to anxiety, and then that anxiety is actually stemming from a panic or despair. And then the more that we can target whatever that emotion is, the more that we can speak into a reassurance of it. And I thought that that was a really powerful way to navigate all of that. And then I also love the idea of not labeling any emotion as necessarily good or bad. They all are integral into this human experience. This is kind of like the Inside Out philosophy from that Pixar movie,
Yes.
where at a certain point it's like sadness, can you just get out of the way or not be in the picture? But there's this real interesting duality to it. I guess it's probably better surmised as polarity, considering that, you know, the polarity is the what we should see. It's actually one, even though it seems to be two. But like, we need sometimes those feelings of sadness in order to grow through discomfort, and also to have that appreciation for the moments of joy. You know, one of the things, I love the answer basically being that awareness is the starting point for returning to center from our extremes. One of the things that I've been finding recently is, okay, I get into that state of awareness. I'm in my extreme. Okay, now I get to make a choice. And that choice is going to be between the perception of lack or the perception of abundancy. And when I get into that place of perceived lack, that's the narcissistic entitlement emerging. I get into that place of perceived abundancy, and then all of a sudden it's gratitude and it's appreciation. And so one of the things that I've been sort of leaning towards lately and grounding myself in is that appreciation or gratitude is the antidote to the narcissistic entitlement. Of course, it requires awareness in order to be able to make that choice to begin with. But the choice really stands between, well, do we feel that we deserve more, or are we appreciating the endowments and the blessings that are in our life? And then that's almost like an issue of focus. So I get to choose what I focus on. And then that one will lead me towards sadness, and one will lead me towards happiness. And or maybe even better said, one will lead me towards misery and conflict, and then one will lead me toward meaningful connection.
I love that you said that. I have to jump in here, because gratitude really is the antidote for all of that. And it's not just a nice idea and not just a feel-good thing, but biologically, there's actual real science behind it, because stress and gratitude can't live in the same space. Those two things can't live in our body at the same time. So if we are in gratitude, have the morning ritual, or you're in rituals, as you said. I love that, right? If we do something to keep ourselves grounded and in that state of joy and appreciation, then you just can't have stress. You can't have that self-righteousness, that entitlement, that judgment, because it just can't live in the same space. So it's very powerful.
Yeah, something that I've been feeling a lot recently with all of the lifing the way that it has. I'd say that the most pressing emotion or points have been, and the reason that I gravitated to this earlier was because I was tracing the emotional wheel in your human behavior toolkit and identifying that it actually is despair and panic that's driving the fear within me. The despair is when I look towards the past. There's a lot of regret that comes up from, now being at a point where my marriage has ended, and looking back and reflecting and saying, wow, gosh, so often I was living out of my extremes. And while I identified this earlier, like very, very creative powerhouse in my center, but I go into that extreme and I become incredibly unreliable. And the not having that purple personality tendency developed within me led me to not necessarily be as supportive as I needed to be in order to sustain that relationship. And then I look toward the future, and there's all of this uncertainty, and I feel that panic. And once again, neither of them are actually being present. When I get into a place of being present, then the only thing that I have is gratitude, because I'm just now coming out of this blindness episode where out of nowhere my retina detached in my right eye and I went blind in it over the course of 3 days, and here we are. This is why it's been so long since the last podcast, but here we are now on the other side, and I just got cleared yesterday to return to normal life, unrestricted, and it's given me so much clarity and perspective to just say, okay, if I'm actually focused in the present moment, I'm not worrying about the fact that this illness or this injury happened to me. I'm not worried so much about, well, could it ever happen again in the future? I find myself in this place where, oh my gosh, I'm so blessed that I can see right now, and I can look at my son with both of my eyes. And, it gets into this place where the faith comes in. I was doing my green in ritual yesterday in Bible study, and there's this story in Matthew chapter 8. So it's right after the Sermon on the Mount, where we've had a lot of preaching, but then we go into chapter 8, and it's a lot of practicing what you preach. And it's Christ going around and healing a lot of people. And there's this instance where all of the disciples are on the boat, and they're going through the storm, and they are freaking out because the waves are getting big and Jesus is asleep, and they wake him up and they say, "Lord, please save us." And he goes, "Oh, ye of little faith," and then calms the storm, and they're all marveling. Who is this guy? As if you didn't already come to that conclusion before you decided to follow. But before that, there's this moment with a centurion showing up, and this is essentially a Roman soldier. This is not anybody native to Israel, and he is so convinced and has so much faith in the power of Christ's ability to heal that he doesn't even need Jesus to come with him back to his house in order to heal his servant. It's enough for him to just say, "Lord, you say the word, and I'll go home and know that it's done." And, Jesus is really impacted by that level of faith. He says, I haven't seen any of this from my people, but here's an outsider who is displaying faith beyond measure. And, it's one thing to be a disciple and then you're in the boat and it's rocking, versus, you're actually an outsider, but you have that such deep respect and faith that then you can literally just trust. And so that's been a real lesson to me. It impacted me really on my heart yesterday. And so that's why I'm carrying it with me today. It's like, live with the faith of the centurion. And sometimes I think that we, as a disciple, we want to see the confirmation in order to know that we're following the right path. But then there's something about literally just being present. And it's this idea that was a reoccurring theme yesterday. And I think that this will speak to all of the personality tendencies in their center. It is what it is. It's not, it is what it was. It's not, it is what it will be. All of these things are the fear or the panic, despair. It's just, it is what it is. It's present. And when we look at that, then we can get into that place where it's just blessings.
And we can be observers.
Yeah, really. It is what it is. That is a statement. I love that. That's a statement of observation as opposed to judgment. Yeah, there's a lot of, sometimes the simplest things can be the most profound. This is going to link back into the there's no shortage of personality assessment tools that are out there. Some of them have a lot of different types and can become very complicated. I think that Myers-Briggs is a great example of that because
Yes.
I can never remember what I am based on those letters and initials.
IFJBQLP.
LMNOP. And I get to this place where I go, one of the things that's really attracted me to this technology is its simplicity. I kind of say Myers-Briggs is PC and primary colors / the color matrix is Mac. It's just a sort of a simpler, easier to use interface that is overall pleasing. Now, I would love to know, for you, what are the different major tools that are out there, and then what sets this one apart in terms of it being, I don't know if simple is the right word because it can go incredibly deep.
That's
but
true.
Easy to use and easy to remember. Has that been your experience?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me about that.
There's a couple things I want to say to this point. So professionally, there is another assessment grouping that I love just because it tends to be more work focused, if you will. It's more for, who we are in that workspace. DISC is one of the most common ones out there, right? I mean, probably everyone has heard of DISC. There's lots of different companies that do DISC. Again, they tend to, you're not going to understand context, even though I personally explain context, that we should realize this is more geared to our work self as opposed to who we are in relationship or any other context we might be in. You're not going to get into centered and extremes, right? So even though the color matrix has these different layers to it, the fact that we lean into the color wheel, that it's something as simple that a child can understand. And I think that's really important that, if a 8-year-old can understand something, then we as adults are probably going to be able to retain the information, right? So a great example, I share this a lot when I am facilitating, especially when it comes to the color matrix, is this was many years ago. It was shortly after I started working with your mother on the color tools. And of course, even though my son was probably 7 or 8 at the time, my daughter was 13, I had them take the primary colors assessments, right? I didn't get into all the layers, but I certainly wanted them to take it in the context of who they are at school and who are they when they're home. And so we identified their colors, we talked about it, and again, we're talking about colors. They can understand behavioral types and tendencies. I said the word types, but behavioral tendencies if they're a red, right? They tend to be more headstrong, they're more determined.
Yeah, all about winning and getting that
yes.
power.
So we kind of went through the 6 different colors and who they are in a centered and who they are in extreme. So one story I like to share is that there was a day I had not done my morning and ritual, and I was in the kitchen, and I don't even know what set me off, but something set me off. And meanwhile, my kids are out in the living room. They're on the couch. They're just doing their thing. They're all good. And we have a pass through, so the kitchen and living room are pretty open, right? At least at the time. And I'm clearly not in my center. And I'm throwing things in the dishwasher and I'm slamming cabinets. And I overhear my son tell his sister, wow, mom must be in her extremes. For a child to be able to say that. Now, of course, I heard it. And thankfully, I was aware enough that it immediately took me back to center. I stopped. I went around. I gave him a huge hug. I thanked him. And, took me a few minutes, but I was good, right? Like that alone.
That's that awareness that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, yeah. And another side note I want to mention is that both of my children were bullied to some degree in school. And because of these tools, they were able, even at a young age, when their frontal cortex is not fully developed, they were able to differentiate the behavior from the individual, from those people that were bullying them. They didn't like it, I mean, they were still feeling all the feels. We were still having to deal with stuff, but they were able to identify that it was their behavior, not it was this person is fill in the blank. How many times, even as adults, do we label someone that they are this way because of that extreme behavior?
Yes. Well, that's really the risk is that, and I think that this happened in my marriage. There was a certain point where we begin to define the person according to their extremes, as opposed to remembering and choosing who they are in the center, and then having that patience and saying, no, I don't choose to define you according to this behavior. I know who the real you is. And that's a valuable skill. That's like, we have to make the choice within ourselves to return to center, but then we also, as critically, have to make that choice to hold on to the center of the people that we care about.
Absolutely. And whether we're working with someone or we're in an intimate relationship with someone or whatever the relationship dynamic is, we have a responsibility to show up as our best self. We have a responsibility to course correct when needed and to communicate effectively. So there needs to be some kind of agreement. So when we feel ourselves slipping, and if we don't feel like we can get back to center, then there needs to be some kind of agreed upon word or sentiment that's shared so that we can take a step back and go regroup, right? Like we can exit. We can either step out and go, okay, this meeting is going sideways, or clearly my emotions are starting to take over. So in our house, it was the word popcorn. If any of us...
You had a safe word.
We had a safe word. So if we felt like we were slipping into our extremes and weren't able to get back, we said popcorn. And then we all knew we go to our respected corners and we regroup when we're all in our center, right? And I say all because there were 3 of us in the house, right? But whether it's your relationship, somebody that you work with, that's why communication is so important. That's why I'm creating so many communication tools right now. It's just insane because we need to be able to have the ability to communicate effectively. And so many people say, well, I don't like confrontation. Well, who likes confrontation? Don't call it confrontation. I want to have a healthy conversation. I want to be able to communicate effectively with you. Don't call it confrontation. Say, I want to have a constructive conversation.
Yeah, that's even in itself like a judgment of confrontation. Because especially if we're talking about somebody with strong yellow personality tendencies, they will avoid conflict or confrontation at any cost. It's better to, instead of framing it, this is getting into another thing that we've been exploring recently, reframing.
Yes.
But you say not necessarily confrontation, but conflict resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And you touch on this, a lot of what you're talking about in your human behavior toolkit, the power in, once we're aware of the extreme, of sometimes being able to take a step back. Now that could be like literally exiting the conversation, which sometimes can be incredibly helpful, but also some cases just breathing differently, where we take 4 seconds to hold on to it, then let it go, and just even that little pause.
Yep, practice the pause.
Yeah, that's a great mindfulness exercise to reevaluate. And do you think that are other personality assessments, communicating this?
Not very well, if they are at all. I don't see it. I've been introduced to quite a few over the years, and they're not taking that next step. Right? Now, the facilitator, if there's a coach, consultant, whoever it might be using the tool, if they're worth their weight in gold, then they certainly are bringing that added value to the assessment. But the assessment themselves,
You see, this is where I get to the point if we're really talking about managing the relationships. When this is why primary colors and the personality color matrix are relationship help tools. Because it's not just so much about understanding who you are, how you act, typifying yourself, but also understanding how to navigate that way back to center. So if I'm using something that's 4 quadrants like DISC, or I'm using the big 5, there's not the built-in way to navigate out of an extreme state or emotion by looking at the center of the complementary color across the color wheel. I mean, there's just something about not only the simplicity of the artist color wheel, we all know it, but also built in, just in that framework, is the strategy to help you show up as the best version of yourself in your relationship. So it's like, man, I'm in my extreme red and I'm in that individual warpath. I'm not thinking about anything other than winning and dominating. But then you get to that point where you go, okay, well, that's happening. What do I do? Look at centered green, the complementary color just right across the wheel, and then go, okay, wait, there is a win-win that's possible. Maybe even a win-win-win.
Which is the ideal.
The ideal. Yeah, glorify the Lord and the planet. And you are able to navigate your way from individual warpath to collective prosperity. If you're in that extreme blue and you're getting obsessive, overthinking, being overly critical or dismissive because everybody's an idiot, then it behooves you to look at centered orange and go, why so serious? How do I bring more joy into this? Vice versa, if you're living completely for that instant gratification and you're in extreme orange and it's leading you into a selfish pursuit where you're just chasing that pleasure, even at the expense of avoiding consequences at all cost, which then leads into a downward spiral of lying or, trying to cover up our obsessions or addictions, then it really behooves us to look at that centered blue and go, well, I need to pause and think before I act, because I'm about to jump out of the plane without the parachute. And that for me is something that really, already there's this concept of contextual analysis. There's the easy to use nature of it. Then you add on top of that the ability to navigate your way back from extreme into center with very clear, tangible strategies that anybody with purple personality tendencies could appreciate. Then it's really different. I mean, this is where I get to a point, and I know I'm very biased here, okay? But this is my blue/green personality tendencies. But when I look at DISC, I see a McDonald's cheeseburger. And when I look at the personality color matrix, I see something that's organic. And it's grilled on the backyard grill, and it's just to my taste. Has that been your experience? And because you're well versed in these. Clearly, I came into this whole situation with my mother having invented this technology, and it's been licensed for 40 years, and we've used this in order to heal our relationship. But has there ever been a point where you're in your growth strategist, leadership advisor, team alignment world, and you're going, yeah, they want me to use this assessment, but actually I'd prefer to go back to the simplicity and the wisdom of the color matrix. Has that happened?
Yes.
Okay, tell me that whole story, please.
Yes. So a few years ago, I was actually called by a national trucking company because they were having their annual leadership retreat here in Scottsdale, Arizona. And they were looking for somebody to do, I think they specifically asked for the color code, which is a modified version of DISC. And they saw that I was a DISC, I was certified in primary colors, I was certified in DISC. And they said, do you have anything like that? And so since they weren't specifically looking, they were, he had some experience in this. Anyway, long conversation. It was clear to me they wanted something like DISC, right? They wanted a 4-color thing. They were familiar with that. I had 2 hours because I wanted something to kind of break up what they were working on for the 3 days they were here. And I'm like, okay, they want something. And I just kept going back to, at the time, primary colors, because color matrix hadn't quite evolved yet. And I just knew that if they had these tools in the centered extreme in context aspect of the primary colors, that would be a home run for them. I just felt in my gut that that's what I wanted to do. And even though I like more time for it, I felt like I could do it. So we did. There were probably, I think there were 50, 55 people, huge banquet room at a hotel, and we dove in. And oh my gosh, they had so much fun. They actually decided had a golf outing the next day, and they decided they were going to break into groups by color. And I said, I have a better suggestion. You need to break into groups where there's there's a representative of each color in the group. And they're like, oh, so they had so much fun with it. I got the best email from the president of the company after just how much fun they had and that it was being retained. Like they were still talking about it weeks later. So that's what you want. You want them. I think that's a big difference in this assessment versus other ones. And I know there's 6 specific assessments to the color matrix, but in general, the difference is, how does it stick? How are people really retaining the information and then applying it to their daily routine? And you just don't find that. People tend to, unless they have someone working with them. And that's why I love the work that I do with organizations, because it's not just about the one time, here's your hit of, I'm going to learn something about personality and how I work, and then you don't ever see it again. It's how can we incorporate this into our daily activities and make this something that's going to be really impactful. And this in and of itself can do that far more than another assessment. So do both really get even deeper and more value when you have a facilitator that can help you apply it? Of course. But if all you did was take some other assessment and take the color matrix, just the tool itself is going to be much more impactful to your ongoing development by doing the color matrix. That's my opinion.
Well, considering your expertise and experience, I think that is one of the best testimonials that we could ever hope for. You talked earlier about how we're emotional beings.
Yes.
And I think that a key aspect of us being emotional beings is that we live in a relational reality. So relationally, what do you see going on out there in the world that is tearing apart relationships? And then what's the solution to that based on your understanding of personality color matrix?
I'm going to speak in generalities. Not my favorite thing to do, however. Generally speaking, there are far too many people in society today that are living in their primal cortex. They have not been, whether it's by choice or by circumstance, they have not been introduced to the concept of emotional intelligence and understanding their own behavior. And so with so many people living in their primal cortex, aka being reactionary, we are seeing people behave impulsively, right? Which is causing a ripple effect, because then everyone just reacts, as opposed to respond. Right. Hit the pause button. Let's sit back. Let's use this fabulous tool we have in our brain called critical thinking, right? Let's make a choice. And with your book coming out, if we could have that book in everybody's hands, not only to actually read it, but to apply it, literally our world could look completely different in the next 12 months. That's how game-changing something like the color matrix can be. Will people do it? Just like anything, it takes one, right? Someone read it. If you find value, pass it along. I would encourage everyone that gets the book, that enjoys it in any way, shape, or form, get 5 more and gift them. We've got the holidays coming up. They'll be here before we know it. And gift them. If you're a professional, get them in the hands of decision makers, right? It's a movement needs to be made. If we as humans are going to continue to evolve in a positive direction because far too many are reactionary.
I love that answer. Uh, yeah, thank you. And I really do believe that too. It's why I've shifted and really dedicated myself towards this technology getting in the hands of everybody, because I believe that it really can transform.
I want to interject. The reason I think the color matrix can be such a powerful tool, even for those that haven't been introduced to the concept of emotional intelligence and understanding our emotions and all of that, is because you and your mother wrote the book. You have two generations. You have two completely different political ideologies, which
Yeah, we would go to we would literally come to blows. I mean, figuratively speaking, but pretty close to literal.
so there are so many layers and powerful lessons in this book. I mean, 5 years ago, families were being torn apart
We were one of them.
in so many ways, right? We were told we couldn't visit family if they were in a nursing home and in the hospital, and people weren't able to say goodbye. And, families were fighting over who was in office. I mean, it's been very destructive. And the fact that you and your mother were able to write this book, you can see I'm getting emotional about this. I really do pray that more people read the book and can really take to heart the powerful lessons within. Because if you and your mother can get through this and write this book, considering what you two have gone through and how you've been able to come back together, I mean, you've been living with her. Imagine that, where you were and where you are now. It's night and day. And so I'm telling you, I mean, we've got to get this information out there and help people. We just have to. Sorry.
No, it's the truth. The thing that I was thinking about when I look out there and what concerns me is the division, and how that I at a certain point allowed trying to be right to overshadow being love, and it's so easy to dismiss perspectives that we don't want to agree with or that we don't want to entertain, but at the same time, it's how could I sacrifice my relationship with the woman that gave me life, or sabotage it in order to get imaginary points on a Facebook scoreboard? It just doesn't make any sense. And I'm so grateful that she, first of all, that she said, Corbin, in order, she didn't just give up on me. She said, I need you to learn this technology so that you can see that I'm not trying to purposely upset you, or that, I'm not necessarily quote unquote incorrect in my beliefs. But yeah, that was such a blessing. And to be able to write the book from that boomer perspective and millennial perspective, and how we can heal the division, reform those connections, and repair those broken relationships. And then actually seeing it in our daily interactions. It's not always easy, but every day with the more awareness, it gets easier to choose the center over the alternative of the extreme.
And it gets easier to choose to see others in their center and not their extreme, which is a Christian concept as well.
Compassion over judgment. Yeah. Wow. Stacy, I've just loved the sit down. I want to, obviously, we're going to circle back here in some time. But I really want to let you know that I appreciate the way that you have reflected back to me, and sort of in a way reaffirmed this the value of this. But then I also really appreciate the way that you're putting out all of these tools, like your human behavior toolkit, that are out there to help people reorient and be able to see, well, there is a difference between behaving in my center or my extreme, or making myself more aware of my emotions, How do I make the choice to respond instead of just mindlessly react? And the only thing that I mean, what I pray is that there's just a movement of more people showing up in the world like you do, whether it's personally, especially professionally, because these businesses also are a large driving force of consumerism, and that can lead to unconscious consumption. And so, yeah, getting this in the hands of those decision makers, as you said earlier, is like we need as many ambassadors and experts in human behavior and personality to be out there helping, serving. And so I just want to thank you for being you and for being here with me today.
It's been a pleasure. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Now, if somebody is looking for Stacy Axon's Human Behavior Toolkit, you're going to be able to find a link to purchase that in the description below. And you can also, from there, find links in order to invite Stacy to help lead your organization in a team alignment, or if you are an entrepreneur, then you can hire her as a growth strategist and just ask her to bring the personality color matrix codes and all of her wisdom as a trainer, and that will be a tremendous blessing. I think that you'll enjoy working with her as much as I've enjoyed sitting down and talking to her today. So with that being said, I hope that all of you have a blessed day. Thank you for watching, and stay colorful.